Good afternoon, Mr. Alsano. Good afternoon, Mr. Kariuki. Lovely to be with you both today.
Good afternoon, too.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Nice to see you both. So today we're here to do a bit of a case review or a discussion. And today we're revisiting one of the most famous cases or most famous trials in history, I think. And this is the case of Jesus Christ. We'll be looking at it under Roman law. So what happened in Roman law back then? Was it lawful for the times? So I think we should jump right in. I think it's going to be a really interesting one. My first question is for you, Mr. Alsano. So in Roman law, what would the actual charges have been against Jesus?
Okay, thank you for that question. They accused Jesus of Nazareth, was condemned on a broad range of charges. The first one was blasphemy, in that he declared himself to be God and the Son of God, arrogating divine prerogatives that no mortal may claim under the statutes of Judea. Second charge was sedition. He proclaimed himself King of the Jews, entered Jerusalem in a royal procession, and incited crowds to hail him as sovereign in violation of the Lex Julia de Homested, which protests the majesty of Rome. The third charge was public disorder. He disturbed the peace of the city, drawing multitudes into unrest and confusion. The fourth was assault. He overturned the tables of lawful hawkers in the temple, driving them out of force by force, committing acts of violence against men, conducting commerce under lawful sanction. The fourth one is unlawful assemblies. He confined meetings in large crowds without permit, defying Roman regulation of assemblies designed to preserve order. And then so stood charged for gang leadership. He commanded a band of 12 men, his chosen disciples, who acted under his authority as an unlawful faction, moving from place to place in organized defiance of lawful oversight. And then he also stood charged with magic and superstition. He practiced what witnesses describe as miracles, healing the sick, casting out spirits, multiplying food, acts that fall within the prohibitions of Roman law against sorcery and superstition, misleading the populace and eroding respect for established religion. So each of these charges is grave in itself. So taken together, they form a pattern of defiance against both divine law and imperial majesty. Thank you.
Wow, that is a lot of charges. I think the one that surprised me, even as a Christian, was gang leadership. I think that was quite interesting. Mr. Kariuki, was Jesus afforded anything resembling due process, or was it more of a political play, do you think?
He was not actually afforded any legal process. He's the rest of what he listed. And as for from what my colleague has just said, you can see even if he were a prosecutor then it seems Jesus actually would have had so many counts. Because I think the petition that I have before for today, your lordship, is that Jesus actually was charged with treason. Actually, before it was blasphemy, it was again substituted to treason without actually being notified as to why, they kept on the charge, substituting the charges. As far as I'm concerned, Jesus never actually was never accorded the due process of the law for so many reasons. For so many reasons, because my case is grounded on around 10 grounds or 7. And one, I would be saying that the mode of arrest was actually it was illegal. The proceedings were made private and actually in a private house, that is an Anna's house and also Khalifa's house. Also, beside the above, there's nothing in law like night proceedings. That was against the principles of law. The trial of Jesus was also illegal. If you see the time from the time he was arrested and the time he was actually crucified, it took less than 1 day for reasons well known to the judges. Again, the indictment against Jesus was false and unproven. It's on record. There are those two people who came and actually tried to give false evidence, which did not even stand the time. And that is why, at the end, they kept on substituting these charges. And the fifth one is actually condemnation of Jesus by priest or San Henry was illegal because those who might have actually voted against their decision were not present during the passing of that particular judgment. And six, second, the sentence of Jesus was pronounced in a place forbidden by law. This was not a court of law. This was not a court of law. Where the Sanhedrin actually sat at Khalifa's house, it was not a court of law. And I will actually substantiate in my submission when it comes to it at length. And lastly, most Sanhedrin members were actually disqualified to try Jesus. For one reason that, the criminal code of a Jew also provided that under no circumstances should you ever actually sit as a judge while you are actually an enemy of the accused person. And you can see whatever happened here. These are the judges who actually bribed or compromised Judas for him to be Jesus. And they're the same people actually who are sitting that 71 judges, So that one, it was against even the Jewish law. And there is actually the illegal of substituting the charges against Jesus from blasphemy to treason. Actually, that one is the major one. Because like now, if you ask me, Jesus had 6 trials. From the time of arrest to his crucifixion, there were 6 trials. It was actually a trial and error. And the reason is because the Romans and the Jews never used to see each other eye to eye. And there was a lot of tension in Jerusalem during this particular period of performance. So one wanted to please the other, or the other one actually wanted to throw the other one under the bus. And I'll substantiate my ground substantively when we come to the proceedings. Those are my grounds, and from whatever you had asked before, is that Jesus was never accorded a fair trial, and these charges were actually ran. They were transported the accusations based on the enmity between the Pharisees and Sadducees against Jesus. Those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alsano, do you believe that a Roman citizen would have been treated differently in that same situation?
Okay, personally, I do not believe that a Roman citizen would have been treated differently because you see, Judea was under Roman authority, and though he was not a Roman citizen, but the laws that governed every person who lived within the jurisdiction, they were the same laws. That's what I believe. So Jesus was tried fairly, according to me. And I don't know whether you can give me 2 minutes to dispute what my colleague has said.
Yes, you can.
Okay. First of all, I've heard my colleague say that talking about the legality of the church transformation from maybe blasphemy to treason, and I could say that blasphemy was a religious offense under Jewish law, but Rome did not prosecute blasphemy. For Roman authority to intervene, the church had to be reframed into a political crime, which is treason. So, secondly, Roman governors routinely reclassified local religious disputes into political offenses when they tried to impede authority. Claiming kingship or messianic sovereignty was legally construed as a direct challenge to Caesar. Therefore, the shift from blasphemy to treason was not a manipulation, but a lawful adaptation to Roman jurisdiction. Without this reframing, Pilate had no legal basis to hear the case. Again, about the legality of the arrests. The Sanhedrin had power to arrest for religious offenses. Jesus was apprehended under the authority and then handed to Roman jurisdiction once the church was reframed. So Roman governors permitted local councils to arrest and present accused persons. Thus, the arrest was lawful under both Jewish and Roman procedure. Then they claim that the arrest was illegal, ignores the Sanhedrin's lawful competence and Rome's recognition of local enforcement. Also, about being not charged in a court or such, I think the defense counsel was mentioned something to that. I point like that. So I can refute that. Jesus was charged before 2 courts. The Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish council, had the blasphemy charge. Then the Roman governor, Pilate, had the treason charge. So these ones were 2 courts. it's common in the colonial or provincial context for churches to pass through local and imperial courts. So the fact that the church evolved does not negate that he was formally tried. Therefore, the defense's claim is factually false. Jesus was indeed charged but tried in courts of law. About fairness, because he also mentioned that he was not accorded a fair trial. That one I also dispute. Jesus was examined by the Sanhedrin, Pilate, and even Herod Antipas. Multiple tribunals ensured scrutiny and fairness. Jesus was questioned directly. For example, are you the king of the Jews? So his silence or limited responses were his choice, not the denial of rights. The trial involved public presentation before crowds, not secret proceedings. Roman practice allowed public visibility to ensure legitimacy. Again, Pilate repeatedly declared, I find no fault in him, showing judicial caution. The eventual sentence was not rushed, but weighed against political stability. Roman law prioritized the public order. So by framing the charge as treason, the trial addressed both legal and political dimensions fairly. So then the defense's allegations, they will actually collapse. So the church transformation was legally necessary and valid. The arrest was lawful under Sanhedrin authority and Roman recognition. Jesus was charged in two courts of law, both Jewish and Roman. The trial was fair, involving multiple hearings, opportunities to respond, and judicial hesitation before sentencing. So I conclude by saying that the prosecution can confidently argue that the proceedings were legally sound and procedurally fair, and the defense's claims are unfounded.
You talked
Thank you.
about public order. How important was public order back then?
Yes. Public order was very important in the Roman Empire because remember, Rome was controlling a very, very large empire at that time. And there were instances where some people or some countries or some people, okay, those some of the people who were being governed were known to revolt. So public order was given priority by the Roman authorities, and it was supposed to be one of the core things that those who were governing those Roman provinces abroad had to make sure that there was public order, and anyone who was suspected, not even seen, even suspected to be uh, doing something that was contrary to public order could be questioned.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kariuki. So I want to know what actual evidence was presented against Jesus.
As I submitted earlier on, there is no evidence that was actually brought from either before the Sanhedrin or the Pontius Pilate. And one at the tail end, in as much that the Pontius Pilate also is a respondent in this matter that I'm actually brought before you. It goes without saying that Pontius Pilate not once or twice, he has actually come back to these Jewish authorities, telling them, I have found no fault on this particular man. That is the Pilate. And even initially, he had actually said that, he had actually told them, go and actually punish him according to your laws. So you get Pilate was actually drawn into a Jewish scenario, not a Roman scenario. Not a Roman scenario. And as you know very well, during this particular period of the season, there was a lot of tension. And before that, Romans, as I said earlier on, they never used to see eye to eye with the Jews, because actually Roman had actually conquered, Jews were actually under the Romans. And here they are saying, even when they were told, go and actually, execute him according to your law, they said that they don't have that power to do it, which is actually, it is incorrect. Because Sanhedrin had the powers to actually, prosecute any case and actually impose a sentence, including the death sentence, apart from sedition and treason. And that is why you're seeing them. They are very cunning. At one point, they tried Jesus in a private house, that is a Caiaphas house. They actually took him now to Pontius Pilate, saying that, this man has actually committed blasphemy. And because that was not within the realm of Pontius Pilate, he told them, take this man to Herod. And Herod also did not actually prosecute the case. After mocking Jesus, he brought back to Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate again came and said, no, I find no wrong with this particular matter. So you get the judgment that was delivered. It was actually Pontius Pilate was actually coerced into actually, releasing Jesus to them for execution. And even they went ahead. Actually, these are the lawmakers. They went ahead, actually telling Pontius Pilate that if you don't order this man's execution, then you're not afraid of Caesar. And because Pontius Pilate was actually under the office of Caesar, he's actually aware he would actually safeguard his office. And actually he went their way. There was no case against Jesus. The trial itself was a sham. And in my substantive submission, I'll prove to my counsel that there was no proceedings. Actually, there was no trial. It was a sham. Pontius Pilate was actually drawn into a war, a religious war, which actually the Sanhedrin had the power to actually punish Jesus by stoning. But because they knew Jesus had a lot of following, Jesus was common to so many people. They didn't want actually to bear that brand of actually being condemned by the public. That is why they came to Pilate. Otherwise, if you go back now to the Bible and you look at the time of Stephen was stoned by who? By the Sanhedrin. They had the power to execute. Why not stone Jesus if at all they believed there was a case against Jesus? I'm not going to preempt my case, but one thing I can tell my senior counsel is that all the charges against Jesus were actually baseless.
Well, that's a very bold claim.
I beg to disagree.
I mean, Mr. Alsano, I'll allow you to address that, but I guess while you're addressing that, if you can help me understand if crucifixion was a proportionate punishment for the alleged offenses back then.
Crucifixion?
Yes, crucifixion.
Yes, it was. It was proportionate at that time because you see, it was one of the punishments that was given to people who were considered to be capital offenders under the Roman Empire. And it was a form of punishment that was reserved for those most dangerous criminals or people who are dangerous in society, so that it can serve an example to others. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, Rome was governing a very, very large area. And in order to be able to govern such a large area, they had to impose very, very such punishments as a crucifixion, so that that one could serve an example to any others who could try to do the same thing as those ones who have been punished were doing. So it was a proportionate form of punishment.
Okay, so who else was typically receiving crucifixion at that time? Was it slaves, rebels, political agitators? Can you give me, do we know?
Is the question for me? Okay, proceed.
Let me assist my brother here. Actually, that crucifixion was actually reserved for foreigners and slaves, not for Romans. And that is why you can see, at first, the charges against Jesus was actually issues about blasphemy, which could not have carried, actually, the punishment ought not to have been crucifixion. It ought to have been stoning. And because the Sanhedrin or the Jewish authority knew that if they stone Jesus during that particular period of the time, it will actually bring a lot of upheaval. That is why actually they actually substituted it to be prisoners, of which it did not stand, because Pilate said, I found this man not guilty, meaning that the issues about trying Jesus before Pilate did not lie with his office. And now he returned Jesus to them. So what was expected was actually Jesus to be stoned, not to be crucified.
Mr. Alsano, any comments?
Yes, I've got some comments there about crucifixion. Yes, it is true that it was reserved for people who are not Roman citizens. But okay, yes, it is true that one. And the Roman citizen, for Roman citizens, these ones were generally punished through beheading, not crucifixion. But there was a reason for this, which my colleague has not mentioned. The reason was for political control. Remember, there was no need to crucify Roman citizens using a crucifixion because Roman citizens could not rebel. The people who were likely to rebel were those people who were non-Roman citizens because they were the ones who are who had been you can use the word captured or were being controlled. So that's the reason why crucifixion was being used as a form of punishment for non-Roman citizens. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Kariuki, I mean, I think you've made it clear that the process, from your point of view, the process was unfair, but I want to find out, where do you think was the greatest failure in the process? Was it the arrest? Was it the legal hearing, the political trial, the demands of the crowd? Where do you think Jesus was most failed through this process?
Everywhere. So if you listen to my ground, from the arrest, from being tried or prosecuted in a private house, belonging to a substitution of the charges, bringing untruthful witness. Yeah, his arrest itself, you can see Judah being bribed, 30 silver, 30 coin silver, so that he can actually bring Jesus to the Jews. And the same people who are actually bribing Jesus are the judges who are sitting in the Sanhedrin Council. So from the word go, you can see a series of violations up to his crucifixion. And that is why Pilate was very cunning, that he knew this man was innocent. Even Pilate's wife told him, there'll come a man who will be brought to you. Don't lay your hand on that particular man. He's an honest person. He's an innocent person. That is on record. It's not from me. It is on record. And to answer your question, is actually from the arrest to the time Jesus had been crucified, everything to do with his trial was actually everything was a violation. And you see, he's being tried by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and these are actually the enemies of Jesus. And if you remember, the caption that I read you was that you can never be a judge, when an accused person happens to be your enemy. You accuse yourself. All of them never accuse themselves, yet they're actually enemies of Jesus. It's on record. It's not me who's actually creating this fact. It's a fact. Go back to the Bible, of which we're relying on to actually, substantiate this point. You'll get actually these are enemies of Jesus, and they're the same people who are actually sitting in the Sanhedrin council. It's a conflict of interest. Those are my submissions, my lady.
So, Mr. Alsano, is this a story of the law blatantly being misused, or is this more a case of legal creativity, still within the realms of the laws at the time?
Yeah, this one was the laws were never misused because if you look at that case clearly, and if you can take yourself back to the context of that time, you will realize that everything was legally done and there was no prejudice for the during the arrest or during the trial. Everything was legally done, and I can say that. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but I can say that all was done legally and fairly.
Well, I mean, Mr. Karuki seems primed for a response.
Yeah.
And I can prove that. I can prove that one.
Let's go ahead, Mr. Karuki. Did you have a rebuttal?
I'm just asking, I just wanted to get your question, whether you are asking about now this petition that we have before court, whether it's for the legal creativity, or are you talking about the trial itself?
So I'm talking about what Jesus went through. Is it a case of the fact that the Romans misused the law, so they used it in their favor, or is it a case of the people within the law were using it in a creative way, so not breaking the law, but just being creative with it and using some elbow room to get their way?
They broke the law in a very creative manner. And I won't stop from repeating from where I'd actually started. You can see after Jesus is arrested, he's taken to Anna's house. From there, he's taken to Caiaphas' house, where they sit in the night. And the proceedings actually proceed in the night. Where on earth, surely, have you ever had a proceeding actually going on in the night? And now you can see a sequence of events from these charges to these charges, from this court to this court, from that where, and also there's a lot of threats. Everything, as I said earlier on, it was a sham, actually, and Pilate was actually drawn, you know, into a Jewish scenario. He had actually tried to resist. He had actually tried to resist from actually drawn into this fiasco between the Jews and Jesus. But finally, he gave in. And as you know very well, it's on fire. It's actually it's on record that you can see issues about Judas and also Pontius Pilate. What happened to them? They all hung themselves because of that guilty conscience. They knew actually he betrayed this man from Galilee.
Wow. I mean, I think what is clear is that there needs to be an actual trial, a retrial, and it needs to be done with a judge, somebody with more experience than me. But this has been really interesting. I just want to now give you a point. If there are any final remarks, I'll start with you, Mr. Osano.
Yes, yes. And as my final remarks, I could beg to disagree with me entirely with what Mr. Karaoke has said about the arrest and maybe the trial being unfair. And I think I've said this before because there was proper authority, there was due process followed. The hearing itself was okay, done under Roman and Jewish jurisdictions. And as you can see, Jesus was tried and examined by three authorities: Sanhedrin, Pilate, and Herod. So the trial process was very, very fair. And then Jesus was even given an opportunity to respond to questions that he was asked, something that happens even in courts nowadays, that an accused person is given an opportunity. And so everything was, also I can add that even the trial was not conducted in secret, it was conducted in public view with the crowds present. So the people's involvement, choosing Barabbas over Jesus demonstrated transparency, even if manipulated by leaders. And then the consistency of the sentence itself, restriction was the standard Roman punishment for non-citizens guilty of treason. This sentence was consistent with Roman law and practice. It was not arbitrary. So I will close by saying that the arrest was lawful under Sanhedrin authority. The trial was conducted under both Jewish and Roman jurisdiction with multiple hearings, ensuring fairness. Jesus was given the opportunity to respond, and his sentence was consistent. Therefore, my very final remark being that the defense's claim of illegality collapses. The arrest and trial were procedurally fair, legally grounded, and consistent with both Jewish and Roman law. Thank you.
So, Mr. Osano, if we were to take this to trial, you'll be confident in that position?
Yes, I would be very confident, and I'm very sure that I will win.
Okay, so you've thrown down the gauntlet. Now, Mr. Kariuki, same question to you. Should we take this to trial with a judge?
Absolutely. And just for clarification, and I think we should be moving from one particular point. You see, these are decided case. These are decided case. A conviction has been entered, and a sentence has been pronounced, and we are doing it posthumously.
Yes.
And it's my view that, which I beseeching with our kind to agree, that we can do it in form of a petition. Actually, that's the way I've approached the issue. It's not a trial. These are trials that have been finalized. Now we are doing a petition. Instead of an appeal, we are doing a petition. Whereby we are trying to show, or what I'm trying to prove is actually there was a lot of violations. And what Mr. Osano will be saying is that there were no violations at all. And in my petition, I've had how many respondents? I've got around 7 respondents,
Wow.
of which I'll share with Mr. Osano about the respondents. And we can go the petition way so that it will be to speak to the point and be able to speak to the law so that we can match between the Roman law, the Jewish law, and also our modern law in a way that will be more understandable.
That sounds very interesting. So leave that with me. We're going to have a petition. I will get an independent party to arbitrate as well, and we can do that. And I think our community will find it interesting as well. But thank you both so much for the passionate and well-researched discussions today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And thank you. So sorry for the disruption that we had initially. Yeah?
No problem. Thank you so much.